Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History and your host for these sessions. We just finished the Civil War. Wow. We're not quite halfway through the book. Seems like only yesterday that I started this, but we're in lesson 146, if you can believe that. Some reminders. First of all, if you want the 20th anniversary edition PDF, it's a new chapter that I wrote that covers the years 2018 to 2023. You can get that free by going on the Wild World of History website, scrolling way down until you get to the sign up for the newsletter link and sign up there, and you should get one automatically. If you don't, within a day, email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com and I'll send it to you. Second reminder, we're about 2 weeks away from the end of convention season. And that means the end of convention special pricing for the US and for the world history curriculum. So I know in the current Biden economy, people are putting off purchases as long as they can. I get it. I understand. I'm just saying that after July 15th, the price is going to go up by over $100. So you might want to make your decisions quickly, save that money. So our US curriculum includes 22 lessons that track perfectly with the book. I mean, we're talking paragraph by paragraph, header by header. There is a built-in AP track if your student is going to take the AP test. We prepare them for that. There are references to documents. You can use either the Patriots History Reader Documents book, or you can just download the documents free yourself from the web. There are teacher's guides that have all the answers to all of the prompts, student guides where they do the writing, tests. Also, any images I use in all my videos can be downloaded as well. So unless you're weird and want to download a picture of Martin Van Buren, but you might want some of the maps or the charts, right? And of course, I teach every unit in high production, high quality video, 45 minutes to an hour. People ask, do you recap what's in the book or do you do different stuff? A little of each. I recap much of what's in the chapters, but I also introduce some different ideas, different deeper analysis sometimes than you see in the book. So it's both reinforcement and addition. And those videos are 45 minutes to an hour divided into usually 3 parts. And I recommend teaching on a 3-hour-a-week schedule. So it's perfect if you want to show 20 minutes of the video, then have your student do 40 minutes in the reading and workbook. Works out great. Anyway, world history, pretty much the same thing, 15 units. They're bigger units because I'm covering Russia, China, Latin America, Africa all at once sometimes. The videos are a little longer. They're an hour to hour and 15 minutes. Goes from 1775 to the present. I recommend doing US history first because the second semester of the world history course has a lot of reading. A Patriot's History of the Modern World, Volume 1 and 2. It's not many more pages than Patriot's History of the United States. It's just broken up into 2 volumes. Anyway, check those out. Again, do so fairly quickly because the sale prices are going to end on July 15th. Oh, and if you want political commentary, because we're in an election season, go over to my Wild World of Politics. First of all, every day, Monday through Friday, I do a video piece called Today's News. I look at 20 to 40 of the most recent stories. I analyze them. I give you some snarky comments, some great nicknames. But I get you stories that I don't think you're going to hear anyplace else as well. Also, if you want deeper political analysis, sign up for my Insider subscription, $6 a month. And in addition to a whole slew of videos, probably 30 hours of videos, the most recent one being Globalism, Then and Now. It's complete now. You can get the whole thing on the Insider, 15 videos. You would get me teaching and discussing the latest political developments, polls, trends, debates, whatever, 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, on Larry's commentary. So great stuff out there. We try to keep it really inexpensive for all you guys. And you can follow me on Substack at Larry Swikart. I put out free columns once or twice a week, and I put out subscription columns once or twice a week. So check it out. I try to not charge for a lot of stuff I do. All right, let's get started here. We are starting a brand new chapter. Chapter 10, The Ideals and Realities of Reconstruction, 1865 to 1876. And our header is Hope and Despair. Less than 2 weeks after Lincoln's assassination, more than 2,100 Union soldiers, this is really heartbreaking, 2,100 Union soldiers boarded the steamboat Sultana at Vicksburg to return to their homes via the Mississippi River. The vessel had a capacity of 376, but on that day it carried soldiers literally packed like sardines from stem to stern. When 8 miles north of Memphis, a boiler exploded, collapsing the superstructure and engulfing the rest of the Sultana in flames. As if the ravages of the war and the death of a president had not dealt the nation enough of a blow, when the dead were accounted for, more than 1,547 people had perished, making the Sultana explosion the worst American water-related disaster in history, even exceeding the number of Americans who would later die on the Lusitania in 1915 by 1,400. By the way, many of those men had just come from Andersonville prison, where they'd spent the war in prison. The loss of the men on the Sultana came as a cruel exclamation point to the end of a devastating war that had already claimed 618,000 men. Earlier that month, just before Lee surrendered, the Army of Northern Virginia had marched out of Richmond to the sound of the rebels blowing up their own gunboats on the James River. One Confederate, S.R. Mallory, recalled that the men were, quote, lighthearted and cheerful, though an empire was passing away around them, unquote. When they reached the Richmond suburbs, however, they saw, quote, dirty-looking women who'd evidently not been improved by the 4-year military association, and dirtier-looking, if possible, children. Mallory noticed the crowds had not gathered to watch the retreat, but to pillage the burning city, looting and burning, while the standards of an empire were being taken from its capital and the tramp of a victorious enemy could be heard at the gates. Remember, these people were starving. Armies of deserters and refugees thronged to southern cities, what was left of them, only to find that even before Union troops arrived, Confederates had set fire to many of the buildings. Union cavalry entered Richmond first, surrounded by mobs of Confederate stragglers, Negroes, and released convicts, suffocating by the air thick with smoke from the fires that swept the streets. Yankee troops, cheered on by former slaves, struggled to finally bring the fires under control and to stop the looting. Northern reporters accompanying federal forces observed crowds of African Americans heading for the State House grounds, merely to walk on ground where just days earlier they had been prohibited from entering. Washington, meanwhile, witnessed one of the grandest illuminations ever recorded, as the entire population lit candles, flew flags, burned lamps, and the Secretary of War ordered a staggering 800-gun salute, 500 in honor of the surrender of Richmond and 300 for Petersburg, which shook the earth as men embraced, women cheered, and for a magical moment, old animosities evaporated in goodwill toward men. That did not last long. When word came that Richmond was aflame, cries of burn it, reverberated. Reporter Noah Brooks concluded that, quote, a more licorice crowd was never seen in Washington than on that night. Oh, I don't know. I'm sure the Democrats under Nancy Pelosi probably could have matched that. When Lincoln traveled to Petersburg in late March to meet with General Grant, perhaps appropriately, the band followed Hail Columbia with, quote, we'll all drink stone blind. The president congratulated the general, claiming to have had, quote, a sneaking idea for some days that Grant neared victory, and proceeded to confer for an hour with Grant over post-war occupation policies. It concerned many that Lincoln had walked around exposed and unescorted through the streets of Petersburg, having arrived at an abandoned dock with no greeting party, and then, on April 4th, had ridden through Richmond itself, overcome by joy at seeing freed slaves shouting, glory to God, glory to God. Later on the night of April 5th, aboard the Malvern, Lincoln jotted down his goals for reuniting the nation. He intended that all confiscated property except slaves would become immediately returned to its owners after a state had ceased its support of the rebellion. Radicals in Congress who heard Lincoln's April 11th Reconstruction speech were unimpressed. Some considered the president shallow for failing to demand, quote, an entire moral and social transformation of the South, as if such were in the hands of any president. Virtually all of Lincoln's cabinet, however, came away from his final meeting convinced that he was more cheerful and happy than they had ever seen him. Lincoln had again insisted that while the federal authority must be imposed and violence suppressed, private citizens in the South should be treated with courtesy and respect. Beyond that, we know little of Lincoln's specific plans, for he met his fate at Ford's Theater 3 days later. Isn't it amazing that he walked unprotected through Richmond and then died in a federal city? The process of readmitting former members of the Confederacy to the Union, rebuilding the South, and establishing a framework for the newly freed slaves to live and work in as free men and women in a hostile environment has been termed Reconstruction. The actual political evolution of Reconstruction, however, involved three distinct phases. Under the first phase, presidential Reconstruction, Lincoln briefly and Andrew Johnson attempted to control the process under two broad precepts. The South should be readmitted to the Union as quickly as possible, with as little punishment as necessary for former Confederates, and the freedmen should obtain full emancipation, free from legal barriers to employment and property ownership. Beyond that, presidential Reconstruction did not attempt to make freedmen citizens, nor did it seek to compensate them for their years in bondage. A second phase followed in congressional Reconstruction. The dominant Republican faction, the Radicals, sought full political equality for the freedmen, pushed for economic compensation through the 40 acres and a mule concept, and demanded more serious punishment for the former rebels. Naturally, the Radicals' distinct positions put them in conflict with President Andrew Johnson, who held to more Lincoln-esque views. Congressional Reconstruction further involved a program to punish Southerners for their rebellion by denying them representation in Washington or by establishing tough requirements to regain the franchise. In the struggle that followed, on one side stood Johnson virtually alone, although in a pinch, some Democrats and a core of so-called moderate Republicans backed him. Moderates of 1865 had strong principles, just not those of the Radicals, who favored more or less full equality of blacks. Now remember, I know it's easy, 21st century looking back, but remember, we're talking about people who 1 year earlier were slaves. And now the discussion is, do we give them full equality, including voting rights, accessibility to all public buildings, so on and so forth? This is a radical step, so no pun intended on the radicals. Confronting and bedeviling Johnson were radical leaders in Congress, most notably Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, who had returned to a seat in 1859 after his caning at the hands of Preston Brooks. They held together a shaky coalition of diverse-minded men, some of whom favored suffrage for all freedmen, others who supported a limited franchise, and still others who advocated voting rights for blacks in the South, but not in the North. The third and final phase of Reconstruction occurred when the radical Reconstruction lost its steam and public support faded. At that point, Southern Democrats, known as Redeemers, restored white supremacy into the state governments, intimidated blacks with segregation, or Jim Crow laws as they're called, and squeezed African Americans out of positions of power in the state governments. Reconstruction officially ended with a Redeemer victory and the Compromise of 1877, in which the final Union troops were withdrawn from the South, leaving blacks unprotected and at the mercy of Southern Democratic governments. It's worth noting that both Lincoln and Johnson sparred with Congress over control of Reconstruction on several occasions, and thus some overlap between presidential and congressional Reconstruction occurred. Although Lincoln had enacted a few precedent-setting policies, The brunt of the initial Reconstruction efforts fell on his successor, Democrat Andrew Johnson. Okay, we're going to stop there today. As always, I do not read the timeline. We go right on to the next section. So I will pick up with that next time with Andrew Johnson takes the helm. See you then.